So one is this concept of Omnifabric, uh, a term I coined um, to try and get at this idea of is of what we're kind of moving beyond. So it's hard to define exactly what the Omnifabric is, because I think we're right at the beginning of understanding what it means. What it is helpful for, I think, is to help define what we're moving towards and away from. And the word that I'm seeing is kind of replacing is that idea of the interface. So for so long, we've talked about interfaces, designing interfaces for interacting with machines, interacting with computers. So you've had obviously the evolution of that. Originally, it was, I think originally we had punch cards. We went into text-based interfaces, and then GUIs, general user interfaces. So being able to point and click. These are all evolutions of the interface. But I think what we're kind of moving beyond when it comes to interfaces with AI, and hi Akiba, welcome to, good to have you. What we're dealing with when we move beyond interfaces, because what interface for me is by definition quite limited. It's a static window into the computer. It's a way of interacting with it. So, but it's quite fixed. And some of these interfaces are, of course, incredibly malleable and flexible. We think about like the terminal, for example, the amount of stuff that you can do there, but they are still nonetheless, in a sense, quite static. They're defined. They are a fixed sized window into the underlying computer to interact with. And I think where the concept of the Omnifabric to move beyond that is that this window is going to look so different. It's not going to be a fixed window anymore. I think we're going to be moving towards a much more dynamic, a much more adaptive and intelligent way of interacting with the underlying computer and digital world, essentially. And so, as I said, I think Omnifabric is still really early on. So what does this kind of mean? A really good example for this, and this ties in with one of the other articles I wrote this week around just Google is killing it. And a lot of this comes down to this kind of old cliche of first time founders focus on products, second time founders focus on distribution. And there is an element of this with with OpenAI versus Google at the moment, whereby setting aside the performance of Gemini as a model, the benchmarks, the advances of Nano Banana, etc. It's actually the distribution that they have is what I'm noticing as being a real game changer. This is just on the ground. I'm not paid by Google or anything like that. This is just my experience of working within the Google Workspace suite. The level of integration of Gemini now, in not just in Gmail, in Docs, but when working with the Gemini app, and the ease of drawing together all the context from your organization, the relevant documents, and obviously the MAB model itself being powerful, and the ease of doing that and the security of doing it from a CTO perspective, having to wear those compliance hats, the idea of everyone having different personal logins to ChatGPT or all these services, potentially asking for a recipe and then sharing some accidentally sharing some confidential business information on the next prompt. It's a bit of a nightmare. And so knowing that there's a single login, it's all contained within Google Workspace. It's all, once we remove that account, they don't have access to it anymore. None of it's been trained. This is a really big pro for enterprise and for business adoption. But also the ease of being able to integrate your email, your documents, just going, hey, what did that person say? And can you find the meeting notes that we had, and then synthesize a response, and also incorporated the tech strategy that we outlined last quarter? That's super powerful. And this comes back to this concept of Omnifabric. And I think Google, in particular Notebook LM by Google, is a really interesting example of this, whereby when you upload this corpus of, so I've been doing a bit of experiment. I've been writing almost daily, every weekday for almost a year now, or well over a year, sorry, almost a year and a half. And I uploaded all those articles, about 240, into Notebook LM, and the killer feature, or the viral feature that kind of brought it to people's attention, however long ago it was, 6 months ago, a year ago. And by the way, welcome to everyone, Pratik, Michael, and Andrea. Thanks for joining. The killer feature of Notebook LM, the podcast feature, is now enhanced with, there's now video. You can convert all your information that you've uploaded. You can create a video of it, slideshow. One of my favorite features was a mind map. So it separates out all the different themes and ideas, and you can click into them, and it will obviously reference the sources. And for me, as I'm planning this year, I'm thinking about trying to take some of the ideas I've been writing about, turning that into a book. Being able to visualize everything I've written about and all the different themes and how they group together has been really, really powerful. And so that, for me, the underlying information is the same, right? It's all my Substack. It's everything I've written about over the last however many years. But being able to, essentially, what I've been trying to hack on myself, and actually Notebook LM really helps with, is I want to bring all this together. And when you're dealing with LLMs, they are when converting them to embeddings, they're essentially converting this information into multi-dimensional relationships. So there is a kind of a shape we can't really visualize, because it's, I think, 12 dimensions. I can't remember how many dimensions there are in vector space. But it's this multi-dimensional shape of how things interact, where meanings overlap, where they diverge. And this is, and the shape remains the same. In this case, it's my writings, but being how we get glimpses of it, how we understand the connections between them. Obviously, I have a lot of stuff in my mind, but even I've forgotten about some of the stuff I've written about, or the exact way I phrased something. And so being able to hold all of that in a single space, and being able to dynamically ask questions of it, turn it into a video, turn it into a podcast, turn it into a poem, whatever, and I think a big part of this, the main limitation on how I interact with this information, how I come to understand it and work through it, is as much my own imagination as it is the limitations, the technical limitations of the tool. And so, and this is where this concept of the Omnifabric comes in, whereas actually once it's in that vector space and LLMs can intelligently interact with it based on what we need, there's a very immediate sort of, like, and if you think about companies' data in a similar way, very obvious, like business intelligence use case. I've got all this information, stored there. I want to just create a dashboard for me on the fly, bringing in this bit, these particular properties, comparing it with this. So that's a very naive way of thinking about how the Omnifabric might look. It might look like a traditional business intelligence dashboard, but actually generated on the fly for me with the exact properties that I'm interested in. But as I said, the reason it would look like that right now is probably because that's all we can imagine. We could convert this into so many different form factors, so many different ways that really help us understand, help us learn, help us go deeper into what is there. And I think this point about learning is so important, because this, for me, is kind of one of my leading themes of 2026 is learning, because we know the pace of change is potentially exponential, but it's at a minimum, it's really fast. And it's not stopping. It's not slowing down. And so, what do we do when confronted with this? I saw a kind of meme the other day of, when change like this, when pressure is put on a system like this, it's like a balloon being squeezed. So what happens? You have a bulge at the bottom and a bulge at the top, and you have people who resist and go, "This is too much. I want out of this. I want to fight this." And then you have those that kind of adopt and change and grow. And I know which side I want to be in, right? And the way to do that and not to be overwhelmed is, rather than going, I'm going to keep up to date with all the latest challenges, I'm going to really master and learn all these new things. If you have the time and the energy and the attitude to do that, that's awesome. More power to you. But I don't think there's many people alive who can do that across all the different dimensions that AI is accelerating on. I think it is impossible. And so then instead of giving up, instead of that apathy, it's going, well, I can learn something every day. I can read. Hey, Dennis, good to have you. I can I can do something. I can figure out how these tools, maybe I don't know all the latest research. Maybe I don't know absolute every, cutting edge implementation. Maybe I haven't used every single new agentic IDE browser or plugin, but I can figure out what problems are in front of me. I can acknowledge that a lot of changes has happened and is happening, and I can revisit it, and I can experiment, and I can try and figure out, is something I'm currently doing, can it be automated? Is there stuff that I couldn't do before that I can now do? And I think that's the really powerful one, is beginning to expand our horizons of what it is possible. And so I guess just to kind of bring it all back together, we're moving, I think, beyond the realm of the static world, of static code, of static interfaces. I think that static code, I kind of always use this idea of like classic code versus dynamic code. Dynamic being LLM, what's happening in kind of LLM latent space. I know Sean Kay talks about kind of ephemeral code. I think he mentioned it, but the code that didn't exist. There's code written, compiled, running on a server, being executed, and then there's kind of computations and code and things being run through LLMs, often using tools, etc. So still relying on some of that kind of classical code, but there's less than you could have an entire story adventure game running entirely in an LLM, which never references any classical code, right? It's all happening in that sort of LLM latent space. So it's a really interesting time. But as we move, as LLMs become more and more powerful, as they become more and more integrated, I think we're going to see, and I know Andrea Karpathy talks about this as well, essentially more and more of AI kind of eating the traditional code bases, that static code. And as we do that, we're going to the concept of an interface, of a static fixed way of this is the form, this is the way you interact with our system, is going to, I think, look incredibly antiquated. It's going to be, how do you want to interact with the system? What do you need from it? And allowing people that freedom and creativity to get what they need from the system that they're using in the way that they need it and the way that they see fit. And this is what I mean by the Omnifabric. Rather than an interface, it's something that is dynamic, it's something that is malleable, changeable, not by the people not by the developers or the people putting it out there, but rather those consuming it. It's a much more interactive, a much more two-way street, conversational. We're seeing that literally with ChatGPT in terms of how you talk to it. I think one of the really interesting modalities with AI is voice. That's been one of the biggest kind of wow moments for me. Is tools like Boardman, which is essentially an AI networking tool. But it when you give it your details, it calls you and you have a conversation with it to understand who you are, and then it will go and connect you with other people it's had conversation with. But that conversation is, the personality they managed to infuse, the level of technology of the voice conversation is really good. And this was a year ago, I think, when I first had the conversation. So I'm sure it's even better now. And so I think voice as a form factor, I think and we're just at the beginning of this. I think there's going to be so many more form factors to come and to experiment with. So I'm very excited with it. I think that at the moment, Google have a huge advantage and a huge lead just in obviously not just the underlying technology in terms of the LLM models that they have, the power of that, but incredibly importantly, the distribution, the way that they can integrate this into existing workflows and really tie things together. Suddenly, the kind of distinction between your Google Docs, your Google Sheets, and your Gmail become like really much less distinct, and you can just in a Gemini app reference all those things and bring them all together and get it to do what you want, which is really powerful. But, how well placed are they to really go beyond these kind of remixing existing interfaces and bring them together and begin to really think about brand new modalities? For me, for example, I would love to have a purely voice driven interaction with my Google, being able to go out on a walk and listen, what emails have come in, maybe draft something, be able to access my calendar. I think to some extent that's probably possible, but it's not fully there yet. And I know that there's some really interesting, and ultimately with a lot of Google as well, it's still contained in the browser, right? And so, especially if you're like a Mac user or Windows user, being able to do this at the OS level and bring together different applications that actually maybe exist on your laptop rather than through purely the browser is a really big next step. So we're right at the beginning of this. It's really exciting, and yeah, would love. I've got to jump off now, but please do subscribe and comment on any of the articles that if any of this resonates or if you disagree, we'd be really interested to hear. And thank you all for joining, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you.